sir. There was no reason to do it. I may have thought at the time that it was, but there was no reason to take another person's life.
She's not a monster of a person. She's a regular little girl.
What no one knew at the time was that the real monster was the person that had intimately abused 13-year-old Catherine and 12-year-old Curtis Jones. It was a horrific secret that festered until it led to an unthinkable act of the children killing their father's fiancée, Nicole Speights. And in 1999, Catherine and Curtis Jones became the youngest children in U.S. history to be convicted of first-degree murder. America's youngest killers, Catherine and Curtis Jones. From the very beginning, all Catherine and Curtis Jones Jr. knew was violence. Their mother, Stacy Fairchild, met Curtis Jones Sr. in 1984 while working at a fast food restaurant when she was 17 and he was 23. Just 3 months later, Stacy was pregnant with Catherine, but the relationship was already turning dangerous. A month in, Curtis Sr. started abusing her physically and emotionally. While pregnant in 1985, Stacy was beaten so viciously her uterus tore. As a result, Catherine was born prematurely. A year later, their son Curtis Jr. was born into the same cycle of violence. The children lived an unstable life as their parents moved to several states before settling in Brevard County, Florida in 1986. On May 9, 1989, the couple tied the knot. But 3 months later, Stacy pawned a gold necklace and brought a one-way ticket to Kansas, leaving 4-year-old Catherine and 3-year-old Curtis behind. Stacy didn't want to abandon her children, but she had 2 reasons why she couldn't take them. 1, Stacy believed that Curtis Sr. would retaliate against her. And 2, her mother was racist and didn't want anything to do with Stacy's biracial children. With his wife gone, Curtis became more violent. In September 1989, he was charged with attempted murder after shooting 2 men in a pool hall. However, it was later downgraded to a misdemeanor after it was determined that it was self-defense. During that time, the children lived with his mother in Alabama. The siblings returned to Florida to live with their dad, and it was just the 3 of them. The children didn't have any stability in their lives because their father moved from relationship to relationship. There was one woman who lived with them for 4 years, but she never became a true mother figure. The children never really had that kind of presence in their lives. So Catherine, just a year older, was forced to step up and become a second parent. She became the closest thing to a mother her little brother ever had. She was also incredibly devoted to her father. No matter what happened, she was a daddy's girl through and through. In 1992, when Catherine was just 7, she went to visit her mother in Kansas. Stacy claims that Catherine looked at her and said, "I want to go back to Florida. My daddy needs me." At the time, Stacy thought it was sweet that her daughter felt so responsible for her family. But now, it's clear that Catherine wasn't just being cute. She was carrying the weight of the entire household on her tiny shoulders. Sometime in 1993, Stacy decided she wanted her children back. She drove over 1,500 miles from Kansas to Florida and picked them up from school. But instead of taking them home, Stacy impulsively decided to drive her kids back to Kansas. Once Curtis Sr. found out that his kids were missing, he called the police and Stacy was arrested and charged with interference of custody. But the charges were later dropped. That May, she finally filed divorce from her husband. Surprisingly, Stacy didn't fight for custody for her children, but she still had visitation for the summer vacations. A few months later, the siblings went to Kansas to visit Stacy. Sometime during the visit, Curtis Jr. confided in his mom that a relative of his father shared the bed with him and had inappropriate contact. And it didn't happen just once. This happened multiple times. It turns out the relative was arrested earlier in 1993 for sexually abusing his girlfriend's 14-year-old daughter. This was a year before any federal sex registration list was created in the United States. Stacy was horrified about what Curtis Jr. told her and called the Department of Children and Families when Curtis went back home. DCF investigated the claim, but the case was closed without any arrests. That was because after returning home to Florida, 8-year-old Curtis Jr. changed his story. According to sheriff documents, Curtis stated that he lied about being abused because he wanted that relative to move out. The abuse didn't stop. In 1996, DCF opened a second investigation after Curtis went to school with a bruised and swollen eye. Even though it was reported, nothing happened. In 1997, Curtis Sr. went to visit his hometown of Mobile, Alabama. That's where he met 28-year-old Sonia Speights. The two immediately fell in love, and it didn't take long for her and her two daughters to make a leap of faith and move from Alabama to Florida in July 1998. For a moment, it seemed things might have finally turned around. Sonia Speights came into Curtis Jr. and Catherine's lives like a breath of fresh air. She worked as a teacher's aide for emotionally handicapped children. It was a job that took patience, compassion, and a lot of heart. Her students adored her, and by all accounts, Sonia was described as kind, gentle, and easy to love. Catherine and Curtis Jr. were happy to have her around. She brought a sense of calm into their lives, something they hadn't felt in a long time. They got along well with their daughters too. The kids trick-or-treated together and shared Thanksgiving dinner back in Alabama. And for once, it felt like a real family. During that Thanksgiving visit, Sonia's daughters told their grandmother that they were homesick and wanted to stay in Alabama. So, with Sonia's blessing, Sonia's mother agreed to keep the girls. Sonia treated the siblings as though they were her own and had a genuine love for them. Even the siblings' mother liked her. With all the big changes happening in their lives, one thing unfortunately remained the same: the abuse. Just months before the murder, the Florida Department of Children and Families opened its third investigation into the Joneses family in just 5 years. On September 22, 1998, Catherine ran away from home for the second time. This time, it was her teacher who raised the alarm. She reported to authorities that she believed that Catherine was being sexually abused. It turns out that the relative that abused Curtis Jr. was now abusing Catherine. Catherine finally found the courage to tell her father about the abuse. In her heart, she believed he would protect her, that he would go after the man that was hurting her. But to Catherine's horror, her father refused to believe her and sided with her abuser. He accused her of lying. And just like that, Catherine's last hope for safety was gone. When DCF investigators found clear signs that Catherine was being sexually abused, she denied it. She lied because she was afraid. Also, Curtis Sr. pressured her to stay quiet, using fear and intimidation to make her retract her claims. But there was something else weighing on her more than anything: the fear of being separated from her little brother. With her mother already out of the picture, Curtis Jr. was all she had. He was her heart, her reason to keep going. So Catherine remained silent because losing her little brother would have broken her even more. Despite clear warnings from investigators that having a convicted sex offender in the home was dangerous, Curtis Sr. made the choice to let that man stay. Once again, Catherine's cries for help were ignored, and the investigation was closed. Just like that, no arrests, no removals, no safety plan. It was the third time in just 5 years that the Department of Children and Families had looked into the Joneses household, and each time they walked away. Each time, Catherine and Curtis were left in the same nightmare. The only person that believed 13-year-old Catherine was her 12-year-old brother, Curtis Jr. One day while the two were walking to school, Curtis confessed to his sister that the same thing was happening to him. The same horror. It never stopped. Not even after the first investigation back in 1994. The lack of any consequences must have emboldened that abuser. It was as if he could get away with doing anything to the children. Just days after the investigation was closed, he walked in on Catherine in the shower. He was inappropriate with himself as she cowered in fear in the corner. And when the disgusting deed was done, that creep left 50 cents on the toilet seat. Catherine became depressed and stopped eating dinner with her family. She even refused to leave her room. To cope with what was happening, Catherine started writing in her journal, and what she wrote was disturbing. She wrote that she wanted to end the lives of everyone she thought was allowing the abuse. Catherine had 4 people in mind for her revenge plot: their abuser, her father, Sonia, and a teacher assistant at her school. We want to note, there is no evidence that Sonia Speights knew what was happening to the children before or after the DCF investigations. She wrote out her plan and then told her brother, and Curtis agreed to help. On January 6, 1999, Sonia was sitting down at the dining room table putting together a 500-piece puzzle. Curtis Sr. had left for the night, leaving Catherine and Curtis alone with Sonia. They knew that their abuser would be there later that night and decided to take their chance. The two found their father's gun in a dresser drawer under some clothes, then went to sit with Sonia at the table. In this interview, Catherine, as an adult, tells what happened.
And I was sitting at the table. I already knew it was fixing to happen. We had already talked about it, and she was sitting at the other dining room table. And he shot her in the chest. And she tried to grab the phone, and I went and took the phone. And I took it to the back room, and I came back. And I can't say how many more times he fired the gun, but I know after maybe the last 2 bullets, I shot out the patio window. I actually took the fingerprints off the gun and wiped it down.
Sonia was hit with 4 of the 9 bullets fired. The children then dragged Sonia's body to the bathroom, leaving a trail of blood behind. They poured bleach on the stains in a crude attempt to clean. Things were real now, and taking a life wasn't as easy as they thought.
He got hysterical. He had an emotional breakdown because, once again, this is reality now. This isn't some idea that's in our head anymore. This is reality. And he freaked out. He had an emotional breakdown, and, I was trying to calm him down.
They ran to Catherine's best friend's house. They told the friend's mother that they were playing with a gun and accidentally shot Sonia. Shocked, the friend's mother told Catherine and Curtis that she was calling the police. So they ran into the woods near their home. They were found the next day and arrested. The children quickly admitted to plotting Sonia's murder. According to the police, the siblings did it out of jealousy. They resented Sonia for taking all of their father's attention. Their confession surprised everyone that knew them. All of the adults in their lives witnessed how much Sonia cared for them. She treated them as though they were her own flesh and blood. According to lead detective Major Todd Goodyear, when the siblings were arrested, Catherine was unemotional and didn't seem remorseful. He said during the interview, she was pretty matter-of-fact. However, according to Catherine, she had completely shut down and didn't grieve the situation until 6 months later when she fully understood what she had done. Amazingly, before the grand jury hearing, Sonia's mother, Juanita Coleman, told the prosecutors that her family didn't want the siblings to be tried as adults. She said, "They're not adults, they're children. God knows I'm hurting, but I can't hate them." Tony Hernandez III, who represented both children but primarily met with Curtis Jr., said, Curtis truly didn't comprehend the gravity of the situation. He asked if he could bring his Nintendo with him to prison. The siblings' lawyer, Kepler Funk, hoped that the children would be charged with manslaughter. The prosecutors were hell-bent on charging the children as adults, despite the victim's family plea to charge them as juveniles. On January 26, 1999, the Brevard County Grand Jury rejected the family's request and charged the 12 and 13-year-olds as adults. That controversial decision made Curtis and Catherine the youngest children at the time to be charged with first-degree murder as adults in U.S. history. In a highly unusual move, the children were put in adult prison instead of a juvenile facility. Due to their ages, the siblings were kept alone in medical wings of their jails and away from the general jail population while they waited for their hearing. In order to bypass a trial, Catherine and Curtis accepted the plea deal. They agreed to plead guilty to second-degree murder. According to Catherine, the prosecution tried to get her to testify against her brother, and he'd get 22 years and she would get 18, but she wouldn't agree to it. Ultimately, the prosecution agreed that the siblings would have the same prison sentence. In August, the siblings pleaded guilty. In October, the judge accepted the plea deal and the siblings were sentenced to 18 years in prison. As Catherine became used to being in prison, she felt something she never felt before, safe. She was away from her abuser and would never have to see him again. In a 2009 prison interview, Catherine stated, "At one point, I was just happy to be away. I know that sounds like really messed up, but there was a point where I was just away from all of that, and I was by myself, and I was safe." It wouldn't be until years later that the truth was finally revealed. Ashley Nellis with the advocacy group The Sentencing Project said that the children should have been kept out of the adult system, and that if their past abuse was investigated more thoroughly, it could have been used as a mitigating factor. But as hard as it was for Catherine to be in jail as a child, there were 2 other children that suffered. Sonia's daughters, Inez and Jessica, were only 8 and 9 at the time of their mother's murder. There were missed graduations, missed birthdays, and missed hugs. In a 2015 interview with the newspaper Florida Today, Jessica said, "Even though it still hurts, I forgive them. God really helped me to forgiveness. I'm a woman of God. I am a woman of God. And having hatred in my heart for them for the rest of my life wouldn't help me at all. It would only tear me down because I would be miserable. I refuse to be miserable. Throughout the years, there were a few failed attempts at getting the siblings clemency. In prison, Catherine got her GED and even found love from a pen pal, then got married in 2013. However, not everything was positive. In 2004, Curtis and several other juvenile detainees escaped after a hurricane knocked down the outer fence of their detention center. He was recaptured the next day and received an additional 318 days. The siblings finally got their chance of freedom in 2015. On July 28th, Curtis was released from prison at the age of 29. Catherine was released a few days later on August 1st at the age of 30. While Curtis has never publicly spoken about the incident, Catherine has been vocal and dedicated her life to juvenile justice advocacy.